quantum computers. This is Intelligent Performance.
Ryan Butta, welcome to the Intelligent Performance Podcast. A real pleasure and a bit of a quirky guest to have on here in terms of our quote-unquote normal type. So first of all, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. For those who are unfamiliar with Ryan's background, he's not only an author, but a very accomplished business person, a consultant, worked across federal government, and currently focused in terms of the communication side at one of the kind of financial departments, helping manage or oversee the behavior of our big four banks and arguably some of the biggest companies in the planet. So, Ryan, thank you so much for being here. And we're here very much to talk about your new book, a very interesting one, which I might let you kind of introduce, because I feel like you might do a better job of kind of speaking to the intent behind your publication.
Thanks very much, Michael. I'm really happy to be here. So my new book is called Bravest Scout at Gallipoli, and it tells the story of Harry Free. And Harry Free was born and raised in Japan, raised as a samurai, but he actually found himself in the Australian Army, and he distinguished himself at the Gallipoli landing, won the first Distinguished Conduct Medal. And then the Second World War, he was actually recruited into military intelligence by the Australian government. He was sent to Japan to spy on the Japanese. He was attacked by the military police, and he came back to Australia where he passed away. His service and his death has not been recognised or honoured by the Australian government. It was actually covered up. And so the book was about trying to restore him to his place in history and see what lessons we can learn about his life that I think is still pretty applicable today.
So on that, I want to start with the question we ask all of our guests. What is your take then on intelligent performance, given all these different historical characters you've come across and your deep kind of research in different things?
Yeah, I'm a voracious reader. I think about, connected to the book or the research, I think about an article written by James many years ago on Formula One drivers. And he quotes in that article Nicky Lauda. And Nicky Lauda said that the secret to success was to win going as slowly as possible. On the one driver. No, I think
it's a great quote.
It's a great quote, and it's applicable to many things. But the article also talked about Ayrton Senna. And of course, he was killed in a high-speed crash through a component failure. And so that also makes me think that, you can have the catchphrases and you can win go as slowly as possible, but at the end of the day, we're kind of insignificant creatures. We're in the surface of a rock hurtling through time and space. And so I think in terms of intelligence performance, I think sometimes we need to remember that, as we hurtle through space, that we are humans, a lot of stuff's out of our control. And we're living in these societies that are progressing very quickly, but I think we need to sometimes say, kind of remember that when we are, before we have action and going about our business or our creative projects, that we are human, and probably the most meaningful use of our time on earth is to be kind to those around us.
What a beautiful answer, Ryan. And I think it really kind of leads in nicely to the complexities of the Anzac story. For the Australian listeners, they're probably very familiar with the quote, maybe the myth of the Anzac, perhaps, or an interpretation, maybe a better way to put it, of the Anzac story and the invasion, arguably, or the battle at Gallipoli. I'm curious, Ryan, in terms of your research, we'll touch on Harry Frame. Is it Frame or Frame? How do I pronounce that?
Harry Free.
Frame. Friend. So you said?
Frame.
Okay. Frame.
Like dream.
Frame like dream. We can work with that.
Yeah.
So Harry Frame, we'll touch on his story in a little bit more, but I'm curious, you mentioned just before we hit record, there are many interpretations, arguably, about what happened at Gallipoli. You've spent a lot of time looking at the whole battle and what actually happened there. What are your biggest takeaways from kind of delving into it?
The tragedy of it, I think, I spent here as a writer, as an Australian writer, you come to write a story about Gallipoli, what can you write? It's over 100 years ago. There's been thousands of words written about it. I wanted to give a depiction to my readers of what Harry might have seen, what he might have went through. And so I knew what battalion he'd fought in, I knew what company of men he'd fought in. So I went back and looked at diaries of those men. Because we only have one letter from Harry describes his time on Peninsula, but so I went to the diaries of other men who were in his company, in his battalion. And what comes through on that is the complete naivety of these young men. And so you've got their diaries a couple of days before they're about to land. Well, we're just going to land and we're going to waltz on up to Constantinople and that'll be it. And, they're on the ship the night before the landing. They complain, oh, the food's terrible. They can't get a blanket. And you just see these young men who went over there. And again, not just Australian men from all over the world were landing there, and they had no idea what they were going into. And to me, the tragedy of it, what was World War I about? It's one of these wars. In World War II, we know we get often to stop blood. But World War I, when you read what was it actually about, and it's just this senseless slaughter, and it was a war directed by British generals at the beginning, especially Gallipoli, who was still a thinking of how war was fought 10, 20, 30 years before machines, before aeroplanes. And so there was this waste of life as they kept using these old tactics. And there's a story of a charge where the Australian troops are ordered to charge, and the order is that they're to go towards the Turkish lines, walking, with no rounds in the chamber, only with bayonets. And they're to walk toward the machine guns, and they do this 4 times. And it's complete refusal to, one, for the Australian commanders to say, this is ridiculous, I'm going to do this. But also the British generals to realize this isn't working. We need to change. We need to change things. So just the tragedy of it really comes through the senselessness of it.
And it sounds like there was obviously Aussies there, the Kiwis were there. There were a whole mix, right? This wasn't just a very, when we get here based in Australia, we get a very Australian-centric view. Obviously, it's called Anzac, so we kind of nod to the Kiwis too. But what was the actual scale in terms of the representation there, in terms of kind of different countries, given it was a time of the height of the British Empire?
Yeah, well, you can imagine everyone from the British Empire. Canadians were there. Really interesting is the Indian troops that were there, Sikhs, Hindus, and the Turkish used this. Some of the Turkish were actually impersonate the Indian troops. There's an instance of Turkish troops giving orders to Australian troops. And the Australians thought they were Indian, giving them orders and then firing on other Australian troops. So to give you an idea of the diversity that mixed up, these young blokes from Australia, they unable to distinguish between these men from different parts of the empire. The French had troops there. They'd drawn troops from their African colonies. So there was African men there. There was one transport company called the Zionist Mule Transport. And so there were Jewish soldiers there as well. The very multicultural pool, as you'd imagine, everyone from the British Empire was called. We seem to focus on the Australians. If you cross the Anzac Bridge in Sydney, there's 2 really nice white British Australians there on the bridge, but we had Indigenous soldiers in the core. We had, there were Maori soldiers in New Zealanders and Australians fighting alongside each other. So I think it's slowly becoming more diverse. Our memory's been quite centric, but I think it's slowly becoming more diverse. And I think with Harry Freed's story, I think he's the only Japanese soldier. There was a very famous sniper, Billy C. He was Indigenous and of Chinese descent. And he was Australia's most famous sniper.
So Harry Freed did well, arguably, to get out alive, given the kind of notoriety of the actual battle itself, and the, you mentioned just before we get on, it's like a real act of endurance. Or resilience in terms of the conditions they prevailed through. Tell us, what did you start to discover about this Harry Freed character, and what perhaps did he do differently, or how did he approach it differently to where others kind of felt a much more kind of sorry fate?
First of all, he's extremely lucky. And I'm just extremely lucky. He had a very, very dangerous job. So he was a scout. And the role of the scout is that once trench warfare begins, so there's the invasion, the landing, and they dig their trenches, and there's trench warfare. His area of operation was the area between the Australian trenches and the Turkish trenches. Now, as a scout, the first thing he did was adapt. And so he modified his army shield. And he did that by sewing leather patches on the elbows and the knees. He got rid of the 303 rifle, and he used to get around with 2 revolvers on each hip, a small pistol under his armpit, and a Bowie knife in his boot. Because he'd be crawling along in no man's land. So every night he would go out of the Australian trenches and he would crawl through no man's land up to the Turkish trenches. He was looking for troop numbers. He was looking for machine gun emplacements. He was looking for where they were digging new trenches. Whenever the generals would plan an attack, they would consult Harry, where was in the sector he was working in. Of course, it was a large battlefront, but in the sector he was working in, they would consult with him. Where was the best place to do this? Where was the best place to do that? How to get to here? One mission he was given, there was a machine gun that was causing havoc amongst Australian troops during the day, and they couldn't really work out where it was. So his job was to go out at night and draw fire from the machine gun. He's basically like throwing bombs at it and then shooting his revolver at it. So you completely, as I said, completely senseless type mission, but he did that. And so they could see the machine gun fire at night and could locate it. He was shot and wounded 18 times at Gallipoli. Journalists that spoke to him afterward in Australia said his body was just covered in scars. But he was exceptionally brave. And again, he'd been raised as a samurai in the Bushido code, which is loyalty, courage, bravery, honor, these types of values. So he had that, but he wanted to be there for the other soldiers, and he was loved. And there's a story of a colonel putting a team together to go on patrol, and Free wasn't on the patrol, but he turns around and Free was standing next to him. He says, "What are you doing here, Harry? You're not on this patrol." And Harry's response was, "I'm on every patrol." And I think he was raised, his father was Australian and his mother was Japanese. So he was raised in Japan in the 1880s. Very difficult for someone of mixed heritage in Japanese culture to be raised at that time. And he never quite fit in, but he learned how to blend in. And so I think when he gets to Gallipoli, he's loved by these men. They don't care that English is his second language. They don't care that he's dark skinned. He can shoot, he can fight, he's brave, and the men loved him. And I think he really found his identity at Gallipoli and repaid that with his service.
And in terms of his actual kind of formal role as a scout, was he on the soldier side, an officer? How did he kind of progress actually in terms of his military career?
So he landed as a lance corporal, and then he was promoted to sergeant on day 3. He won the Distinguished Conduct Medal on day 1, which I'm not a military person background, but a military person the other day told me that it's a serious medal, and then a sergeant got it. He won it because on the first day he was scouting up a valley. He came across a group of soldiers that had been cut off. They were without water, and they were either going to have to surrender, be shot, or they were at their end supposedly. And Harry said, "Well, someone's got to go back and get some water," and no one wanted to volunteer. So he got up out of the trench under Turkish fire, ran back down the gully, collected water bottles off of other dead soldiers, digging in bullets and munitions, and ran back up the valley. And remember, he's only just arrived on this area. He doesn't know the land. He's done that. Delivers the supplies. They're able to hold that post. That post becomes Swing Post, which Charles Bean, a War historian, described as the key to the Australian defensive positions throughout the years of campaign. That would never be held if Harry Fripp hadn't done that. He gets back into the trench. And then he says, actually, the commander's probably going to want to know that you guys are here. So over the edge he goes again, runs down, delivers the message. And then after getting the message to the commander, he says, "Oh, by the way, I've been shot." And he's been shot through the head and shot through the arm. And that's where he goes into Distinguished Conduct Medal. And just to give you an idea of his personality, when he got back to Australia, he was a hero because they only knew him as Harry Free. They didn't know that his real name was Hidetsugu Kitagawa. And so Harry Free was in all the papers, and so the journalists wanted to speak to him, and one of them said to him, "And what did you win the DCM for?" And he said, "Oh, just to carry in some water." And they said, "Jesus, how much water did you carry?" He says, He's very dry, very humble gentleman. But just after Lone Pine, he takes a 75mm shell in the shoulder, and he's evacuated off the peninsula, and he goes to London. And he married a British girl in 1906, and he's recovering in London. But you'd see his son is big, but he wants to get back. He wants to get back to his battalion, and he wants to go back as an officer. And so he starts writing these letters, and what's really unusual, he's a sergeant, and he's on letter writing terms with the generals. And so we've got all these letters from generals and lieutenant colonels and colonels writing back to him and say, "Look, Frank, you're the finest soldier we've had. You delivered a commission." And Harold Walker, Hookie Walker, the British general, says, if you can get back into the field, I'll make you an officer. And he actually writes a letter of recommendation to another Australian general and says, Fred, you know him, he's one of our finest men, deserves a commission. Not sure the other generals will want to give a commission to a Mexican. And because of his revolvers, and they thought he was actually Mexican, and he never told anyone he was Japanese. But you can start to see that sort of racism at the top level, the upper levels of the military. He was a Mexican and they wouldn't get a commission because he was a Mexican. But the rank and file and the soldiers he fought with loved him and responded to his leadership. But he never was made. He never was made an officer.
Well, shocking.
Yeah.
Righty. So his story, obviously, he made an absolute name for himself. Incredible heroicism. Yeah, in Gallipoli, multiple times. I'm guessing he went back and what was the story upon his return after recovering from a cheeky 75mm shell to the shoulder?
Yeah. Well, his story is like so many other Australian soldiers, and we revered the NFAs today, but when they got back, it wasn't always a great reception for them. So Harry went to the soldier settlements team in New South Wales, and that researching that was eye-opening. That was just one big corrupt scam, I think you could call it. That what was happening is government officials were purchasing land for the settlement schemes at inflated prices of their friends, and then the soldiers would get the packages of land on a 30-year deal that they have to pay it back. So the government had no worry paying overs for the land because the soldiers would have to pay it back. So they're crippling debts. But then they'd build these houses for them, and the soldiers have to pay that back. And then the houses, was this corruption scam around the houses, giving up the contracts to their friends, inflating the prices, going and pay for it. Soldiers pay it back, and they split the difference.
That's kind of familiar, Ryan, isn't it?
Nothing changes. And so Harry was on these, and the land was too small and it wasn't appropriate for what they were trying to grow. And so you can see that Harry's story and the rank and file soldiers were put onto these schemes, whereas the officers came back and they ended up Minister of Defence, head of ASIO, these long positions, head of the Foreign Office. Whereas you kind of see why Harry wanted to be a soldier, because he'd sort of found a way forward. But of course, though his skills were used at Gallipoli, he was never actually one of them, so to speak. He was never one of the officers' club. So his time back in Australia, it's heartbreaking to read about journalists going interviewing in the 1920s. He's on the bones of his arms, basically. They talk about him surviving with a bit of dry bread and jam each day, and he's a bit broke. He can't produce. When he does produce fruit, it's he's a champion fruit grower. He's described us, but it's just not enough to survive on.
Well,
and that sort of leads to why he turned up too, because he basically broke, got a young family. But the interesting thing is that how the general public saw these men it was unmanly to get government assistance. And if they complained about soldiers settling in the land, they're considered as wenches. And these men were coming back, and sometimes they had no outward signs of, trauma or injury, but a lot of them had been gassed as well. That was Harry said Harry had a bad arm, but it was kind of like, you're not good enough for the army because your arm's no good, but you're expected to go out and clear 12 hectares of bushland and make it work and plow it. So it was kind of an unfair ask. So a lot of these men were then looked down upon by the local population that were around. And then there were these ridiculous sort of bureaucracies they had to travel through to get money, get their payment, etc. There's one quote by a soldier settler. He said, if I could, I'd rather go back to Germany, I'd go back to France and buy a German than deal with the soldier settlement bureaucracy.
Wow. What a situation to find yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
So, volunteering for World War II to escape abject poverty in your home country sounds like no fun. And I'm curious, when did it transpire? He sounded like he concealed his heritage, as it were, or at least his upbringing. And when did that start to transpire as perhaps an asset again to Australia, which kind of all seem all too willing to exploit, but not so keen to help?
Mm. Well, it's interesting. He lives this double life, I suppose, from a very young age. So growing up in Japan, being a foreigner in Japan in the late 1800s was very dangerous. There was a whole Reformation modernization in Japan, which the samurai class resented. And there was stories of them attacking foreigners with swords in Tokyo. So he had to sort of hide who he really was there. He was an Anglican in Tokyo. Christianity had been banned for a couple of hundred years, so he had to hide that. Then he gets to Australia in 1916. And again, a similar situation is that Japan are our ally. Now, Britain and Japan signed a defence treaty in 1901, and so the defence of the Pacific was left to the Japanese naval fleet. So Australia's defence depended on the Japanese fleet. Australia's biggest fear was Japanese invasion. And so Harry arrives in Australia and he thinks, well, I've fought for our allies. His farm was Australian, he would have felt Australian, but he would have seen a country preparing war with Japan. And so he's actually recruiting when he first gets back. He's at the soldier settlement. He's also teaching Japanese to the Australian intelligence officers.
Wow.
Because they think we need to prepare for the Japanese invasion. So he hides it, and he appears before a royal commission giving information about corruption in the soldier settlement scheme, and he says he's from Canada. And that was his lie. Even when he got into the Australian Army, he told them he was Canadian. He'd been born in this tiny little town in Canada. And I think that was probably to disguise the colour of his skin and also his accent, because I said English was his second language. He spoke with a strong Japanese accent. Of course, no one in those days knew what that was. So he was actually, he might have been Inuit, he might have been Native American, maybe French Canadian. And then when he got to Gallipoli, they actually thought he was Mexican because of how he dressed and how he operated. So he had to buy that amongst his close.
Australian ignorance at its finest.
Yeah. I write in the book, the fact that he had to hide the fact that he was Japanese shows the amount of fear there was of Japanese. The fact that he was able to showed the amount of ignorance that was around that fear. But amongst his friends, he never lost his Japanese identity. I was very fortunate to get access to his personal possessions, and he never renounced his Japanese. He was very proudly Japanese. He kept his kimono till the end. He kept all these little Japanese artifacts. He was very proud of Japanese, but he did have to conceal it. And then as his exploits in Gallipoli faded, and his children were being raised in the 1930s, then they were receiving racist taunts about being China.
Wow. So
when World War II begins, there's obviously this real fear, legitimate fear of Japanese invasion, and that again. So he's actually working for military intelligence in Sydney, and at the same time, he's being denounced as a Japanese agent by people who just see him in the street and writing letters to the police. And there's this Japanese guy getting around. So, a guy who, like I said, never really fit in anywhere, but found a way to blend in as best.
Wow, what an experience, right? Like just hardship everywhere, and then still willing to find like this resolve to keep pushing through, right? Or find a way, or driven by some like you say, some internal code, which would speak to the samurai upbringing, right? I'm not that familiar with. Can you tell us a little bit more just about that? Like, what do you think drove this guy to put up with such hardship, as it were?
Well, I did some research on the Bushido Code. There's a really good book written in 1899. It's called Bushido Sold Japan. And it talks about this set of values and how hard it is on the samurai children, how they're raised. They're just raised to be resilient. It's actually quite a difficult upbringing. That was definitely part of it. And other writers have written a little bit about Harry, saying, well, he went back to Japan. Like when he was recruited, he was sent to Japan, and he probably knew he was going to his death, I think, or he knew it was extremely dangerous. A couple of months prior, the Japanese had found captured a British spy, James Cox, who was working for Reuters, but was about MI6 or whatever it was at that time. He was captured and thrown through a window. And then General Tojo came out and said, this is how we're going to deal with foreign spies and Japanese help. Now, Harry was both. He was Japanese and a spy. So he kind of knew that was going on. The other really serious thing that happened just before he was sent to Japan was that his identity was leaked in the Australian papers. And that might have been purpose, it might have been a blunder. It's hard to tell. And so you're ready to think, why would he go? Why would he still go, knowing that his identity is the spies being leaked? He knows how they deal with the spies. The Australian government can't guarantee safety over there. But he goes, and some authors of the Bushido Code, just the law is the ronin serving the master. But the Bushido Code also says there's no courage in just dying. willy-nilly, so to speak. To paraphrase terribly, it's the warrior knows when it's the right time to die, and he knows when it's the right time to live. And I think Harry wanted to live. He just remarried. He had a young family. His youngest daughter was 13. And so I just see he had this, of all things that come through, he was a loving father. He wasn't always the most stable person, but he's a loving father and he would provide for those children. And he was broke. And when war broke out, or when war looked imminent, he was employed by military intelligence. He gets sent to Sydney to spy on the Japanese community. Then he gets employed by censorship, who have no idea he's working for military intelligence. And then he gets employed by external affairs to serve as the interpreter in Tokyo. So he gets 3 jobs all of a sudden. If he can speak Japanese, he's probably the only person in the Australian military establishment who can speak Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah.
His journey over there. So that kind of, there's a confliction in what you're saying though, in terms of loyal father, not so loyal husband, Japanese, employed in 3 different organizations to assist in some way. And then, but the leaking part of identity, naturally that's going to put him at significant risk when that leaks back to Japan. His time in Japan when he actually goes, how long was he there for? Like what kind of that tenure did he have there?
So he arrived in November of 1940. Now, immediately he's being followed by Japanese agents of the Kempeitai, the military police. And yeah, around that stage, like Japan was militarizing. There was this very aggressive military moment in the government. The Kempeitai would describe as a law unto themselves. They're onto him straight away and they know about it. And he's there supposedly to set up the office for the incoming ambassador. It's our first diplomatic mission ever that's being set up. And he's there. So I used to work intelligence. In January, so 2 months later, he gets attacked on the street. They try to strangle him. Which is a common method at the time over there. He escapes that. And a couple of days later, he checks himself in to St. Luke's Hospital in Tokyo, which is the Americans. And he checks himself in and he's horrified to find that all the American doctors have been evacuated. It's all Japanese doctors. So he doesn't say what's happened to him. They run tests on him. All they can find is got damage to his throat, vocal cords paralyzed, but he won't tell what's happened. He doesn't tell anyone at the diplomatic mission what's happened. So they're like, well, Harry's sick and he's lost his voice, and they send him home. And they send him home in April. And this is very much the Bushido code, to not tell anyone. There's an incident in Gallipoli, the same thing happened. He was captured. He never told anyone until after the war, because to be bested by the enemy was a great shame. And so he didn't say anything. And he came back to Australia and he was broken because he couldn't eat, couldn't swallow. Gets off the boat, can hardly walk. They take him to Royal North Shore Hospital. They run all these tests on him. Can't find anything. He waits till what happens. They bring in throat specialists. His throat's been mangled. Food's going down the way. He's basically wasted away. He's slowly going to eat before they release him to his home. He dies 27 May. So yeah, arrived in November, and then he's back in Australia and passed away 27 May 1941. And then when he does pass away, military intelligence is trying to get the death certificate. External affairs are trying to get the death certificate. Everyone's interested. And then when the death certificate finally comes out, a couple of weeks later, it says that he died of gallbladder cancer. And that's kind of the great mystery of his life, because he was never diagnosed with gallbladder cancer. His medical records show he was discharged as undiagnosed. So the point I make in the book and other authors is made that Australian government recruited him, exposed his identity, they sent him behind enemy lines. And so they had a real interest in getting Harry buried as quickly as possible. And so when I came to the story, he was in an unmarked grave in Sydney and he'd never been recognised. And his wife had tried to get recognition and a headstone for him, because, if you die in service, you're entitled to a military grave. And they never gave that to him. So they said, look, he never worked for him. Never worked for intelligence, never worked for the army in Second World War. He was just an interpreter. He died of cancer. So through the book, through the work, my research, and I've taken all these medical records, I've consulted forensic pathologists, and I'm happy to say that, I petitioned Albanese's office, I petitioned the Veterans Affairs, and they've recognised his service, and they've granted him an official plaque recognising his service. But the interesting thing is, they say, well, we've finally been able to link his gallbladder cancer to his service, and which was I said, well, he didn't die of gallbladder cancer. But yeah, that's small picture.
Extraordinary. What an unbelievable story. I'm curious for you, like, it's hard to read these stories and not be impacted personally. What have you taken from it in terms of how's it kind of shaped your character and perhaps how you think about life?
Yeah, I mean, why don't we write history? I think there's lessons from it that we can still use today. And Harry's story is really interesting. You write a biography of someone, or you write about their life, and you become attached to him. And him and his family, and his son had his son blamed the Japanese taking his father. So the son then signs up for Untold, graduates first in class, gets into terror camp, and gets killed a couple of days later after arriving. He becomes a brilliant rugby player and brilliant cricketer and just had his whole life ahead of him, and it's gone. So you get close to these people and their families, and so there is an emotional impact. But I think Harry's story, it's connected very much to Australia's relationship with Japan. I think in terms of lessons, Japan was pulled into the Western sphere of influence by the US. They forced Japan to open up their isolation. And Harry was a result of that. His father went to Japan because Japan was opening up. They've been forced to open up the world. And then Harry's death, I see as Japan was forced to modernize by the West, but they were never accepted as equals, even when they did become equal. They were, used in World War One as an ally, but after World War One peace conference, so, all they wanted to insert a clause in the peace conference commented saying that there's racial equality. And Australia said, no way, not doing that. And so they were dragged into the West and they were never accepted. And I think you see that in Harry's story. His skills were used, but he was never one of us in terms of the officer class or the elite. He was never accepted. So while I was writing this, there was a survey done of the Australian Public Service and about diversity. And you see the lower ranks of the Australian Public Service, very diverse and reflect the greater population. You got to the higher, very white. And so what was happening in Harry's day is still happening today. And so we have all these great assets and people in multicultural Australia, but we're happy to use their skills, but do we recognize their skills as they should be? I worked in state government, worked in federal government. You can see that. All the Asian Australians will tell you about the bamboo ceiling. And you're an Asian Australian woman, you got the bamboo ceiling and the plastic. What you do, and even working at Austrade, there's the SES thing, and they're white men. It's like referred to as a sweat band. When you exercise, and at the end, there's this white crust after the hard work's done. That's the sweat band.
Yes. So interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's true. I think as a country, as a multicultural country, allegedly, we need to start, recognizing these people. It's not just enough to use them for their skills. They need to be recognized and accepted in all facets. But that's just my view.
No, it's a great perspective, Ryan. I'm curious. I just want to flick to the Turkish side, actually, because I feel like, especially in Australia and New Zealand, when I speak to my Turkish friends, they have naturally a very different perspective on Gallipoli. They don't see it as heroic in any way. We see it as purely an invasion and one which failed ultimately. Tell me, what's your take on that, Ryan, in terms of the kind of counter side of it? The defending troops, the ones who were repelling an opposing force from arguably land which they owned and occupied and had done for some time.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, like I said at the start, it's equally heroic. And I think there's a real respect amongst the troops, the Australian troops and the Turkish troops for that. I completely understand it was an invasion, and you think that. I remember a few years ago, they used to play a football match about sort of bringing these two countries together. And I know, like I said, Ataturk at the time sort of had this patching up of the nations, but I can completely understand why they said, well, you invaded and we repelled you. So it should be a great point along with the Turkish troops. And I don't think, if you think about how Australians think of the Turkish troops, it's not the same as how Australians think of the Japanese troops War II, with the atrocity that committed against Australian prisoners. Don't know if that's a different type of warfare. There was more, you hear these stories of the First World War of the troops in Christmas being in football in no man's land. I don't know. It's kind of strange to think that, and you think how warfare is now. Like, you can't imagine Ukraine's Russians having a ceasefire for a day and getting together for a chat. It doesn't happen. So I think it was very respect amongst the troops. It was obviously extremely brutal. And I can blatantly understand that the Turkish would probably a greater claim to say it was a heroic battle on their part. And it was a battle that brought, and I'm not an expert on the Turkish side at all. And there is a good project, I think it's done by Butta University, going through Turkish archives and Turkish records to try to get that into English so we can, as Australians, have a more fulsome idea of the other side. I know Charles speaks a little bit after the war, so in some Turkish people was not quite complete. But I know that Kemal Atatürk became the father of Turkey. After that, he came to prominence through Gallipoli and then modernized Turkey completely. So I think they must have a very strong connection to that battle, and probably have very strong reasons, as you say, defended their country and regarded the invasion. But I also think that the Australian troops, what they did, it was equally right, just hanging in there. I mean, it's senseless, it's ridiculous, but it would have been very easy to just. And in fact, on the very first day of landing, General Birdwood sent a message to Hamilton and said, "We should evacuate." That was on the first day, and Hamilton, sitting in the comfort of his ship, anchored somewhere in the Mediterranean, said, "What do you mean? You've done the hard work, but you just now dig in." That's senseless. And in the start of the war, senseless. I think. Yeah.
And I've spoken to a number of military people, and they often talk about how we tend to train and scale up for the war, which has just been. That's often what we train for. It's how kind of military, and that's one of the. I think military commanders that I've spoken to are very open to that, actually. Like, I'm not sure if you've led Team of Teams, the McChrystal and his diaries, or kind of reflections on the invasion of Iraq, and about how they went in and they were this highly tuned machine, but their command and control model, where they had to get effectively authority from Washington, really slowed down progress, and to the point where they were just getting absolutely smashed, and they had to innovate on the ground. And they were losing. And I was like, wow, the starkness of his message in that book about how poorly they were doing, like, that certainly didn't hit me as a teenager. That wasn't being filtered back by the balance of the BBC.
It's not what we were getting through Channel 9 either.
Yeah, the stalwarts of free speech, apparently. But it's interesting. I'm just looking at a quote here from I think it is Atatürk, in terms of his reflection, was he said, he commented on the fallen Australians or fallen Anzacs as "You are now lying in the soil of a friendly country." I mean, it's a really, I think the Turks, and even in their diplomacy around Russia and Ukraine, have demonstrated a very high level of kind of diplomacy and neutrality to some capacity, but also a formidable fighting force. And you really don't want to annoy the Turks and kind of fire them up too much. So it's they're proven warriors. So Ryan, thank you so much. Yeah, sorry. Anything you want to say just to close out?
No, I'm glad you got that Atatürk quote, because it's a different approach. Like, it's so magnanimous, and so he had a reason not to say something like that, but he didn't, and it's just, it speaks to a different time, and I do think we've lost that in the world, that no one actually trying to get to a consensus. It's more about treating with on the graves of others. I think that's a very dangerous place to be, and I think that type of leadership from Atatürk, he had every reason not to say anything like that. I think it's really interesting to reflect on why, if just defeating an invading army, then to say something as generous as that. I think it also speaks to one thing that does come through in the research is how other troops thought of the Australian troops as exceptionally brave. And I've always taken that with a great assault. We're really braver than anyone else. But when you hear reports of the English troops, Irish noting in their diaries that I think there was a great respect from them. Turkish troops that these Australians, like, they probably thought we were mad buggers because why weren't we just getting out of there? So I think there was that great respect, and that comes through in that quote from Untold. But, we think we should be very grateful that he makes that statement, and that's there for eternity, because it is a very magnanimous statement.
It's interesting. I think if you look back at the history, we work in the leadership space and what I do more broadly. And if you look at the nature of a commission, like the language of achieving a military commission in the British Army used to be a matter of payment. And I thought that was always a very interesting way to officiate yourself as a leader.
Yeah. Well, and then just on the bit about, you're fighting the last war, General Monash, a lot of people say had like a great influence on the outcome of the First World War. He went in and really changed how war was fought, but he was up against the British generals who were saying in the stories of, him planning battles in France, and the British general saying, well, where's the cavalry? And he goes, well, we're going up against machine guns. And he goes, we need tanks, we need planes, and he had a real respect for the lives of the men. And he worked out how to fight. I was using machinery and men second. But he was having the generals, General such as get upset if he's not involved in this with his cavalry. Honestly, that's 20 years ago. There's no place for horses now against machine guns. So he was able to adapt and using the engineering background to find a new way to fight wars which protected the men as much as possible. And I think they loved it for the very much then were trying to fight the next war rather than thinking of the last one.
Yeah, and I think there's probably some lessons to be learned there in terms of the use of drones these days. You can buy it off Amazon for $20 versus billions and billions of dollars into the submarine world of it's what are we looking for? So certainly not. That's maybe that's a conversation, Ryan. Ryan, it's been awesome chatting to you. Thank you so much for sharing such an amazing story. The book is available, as I can see, across Amazon, The Bravest Scout at Gallipoli, by Ryan Butta. If anyone's got any questions, Ryan, or would like to reach out to you more broadly, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Just through the website. I think my email's on there. They can send me a message through the website, ryanbutta.com. Find me on LinkedIn or wherever I'm always around somewhere, so always happy to answer questions and engage with readers.
Awesome. Ryan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Really enjoyed our chat.